The air in the courtroom was thick and sterile, smelling faintly of old paper and stale coffee. My father, Robert, a slick real estate developer who saw the world as his personal chessboard, was practically vibrating with smug victory. He pointed a finger at my mom, his voice echoing, "You're walking out with nothing." My mother, Sarah, a woman who had spent 30 years shrinking herself to make him seem bigger, just stared at the divorce papers, her eyes brimming with tears. Her hand was shaking so badly she could barely hold the pen. I watched her for a moment. Then I deliberately reached up and removed my white Navy officer's cover, placing it on the table with a soft, definitive sound. I stood up. "Your Honor, there's one more thing to read." I handed a single manila envelope to the bailiff, who passed it up to the bench. The judge, who had looked bored all morning, opened it. His eyes scanned the page. He stiffened, a flicker of genuine surprise. He read it again, and then he let out a short, dry chuckle. He leaned forward into the microphone, his gaze locking onto my father. "Mr. Jensen, she outsmarted you." The courtroom fell silent. My father's face froze, his mind racing to find an angle, a threat. He had no idea what was in that envelope. He had no idea who I'd become. To understand how I, the family disappointment, had just checkmated a man who saw himself as a king, you have to go back 2 months. To the night he made his first critical mistake. The flashback hits me hard. 2 months earlier, we were at some obscenely expensive restaurant with white tablecloths, the kind my father loved. He was holding court, of course, bragging to a fawning business associate about his bulletproof financial setup. I was just sitting there, the invisible daughter, nursing a glass of water. Suddenly his attention snapped to me. "Kate, honey, why don't you get us another bottle of wine? God knows you're not contributing to the legal discussion." He smirked. "How's boat law?" The table let out a polite, forced chuckle. My mother flinched, that tiny, familiar movement of apology, but she said nothing. She never said anything. "My daughter," Robert continued, waving his hand dismissively, "joined the Navy to be what is it? A jag? Pushing paper for sailors?" He leaned in to his guest. "It's cute. She thinks it's a real job." For my entire life, that's what it was. The pat on the head, the dismissive little joke. It was the same tone he used when I won my high school debate tournament. "That's nice, honey." This was just the adult version. But this time was different. I just sipped my water, my eyes going cold. I listened. And he kept talking. He boasted about offshore entities and creative accounting designed to hide his assets from, as he put it, leeches. I just sat there, my mind clicking like a calculator. He wasn't just being a jerk. He wasn't just bragging. He was, I thought to myself, describing felony-level violations of 18 U.S. Code Section 1956. He was committing active, criminal fraud, and he was admitting it, right to my face. That dinner wasn't a one-off. It was just the loudest version of my entire life. I remember this one family barbecue, maybe a year before. The air was thick with smoke, and my father's booming voice. He was raising a toast to my cousin, a guy who'd just landed a mid-level internship at my father's own real estate firm. Now that's a real career. Robert shouted, "Blood and soil. Building something tangible." He had this way of making everything he did sound like he was building the pyramids. Then, of course, he turned to me. He literally patted me on the head, a gesture he stopped using on my brother when he turned 10. "Still playing sailor, Kate? Good for you. It's important to have a hobby." The hobby I just poured 80-hour weeks into for 3 months. I tried. I don't know why I still tried, but I did. I forced a smile and said, "It's going well, Dad. I actually just finished my first prosecution. It was a complex." He cut me off immediately, a loud, barking laugh that made my shoulders tighten. "Prosecution," he bellowed, turning to the family. "Prosecution of what? Someone stealing extra desserts from the mess hall?" The laughter that followed was familiar. It was the same laughter from when I wanted to join the math team instead of the cheerleading squad. "Don't worry, honey," he said, giving me that final dismissive pat. "We'll find a place for you in filing when you're done with your little adventure." Filing. As if I was a child playing office. My little adventure. That's what he saw. He had absolutely no idea who I was. He couldn't even begin to comprehend my world. The very next Monday, my little adventure involved me standing in my service dress blues, inside a skiff, a secure windowless briefing room at Naval Station Norfolk that technically doesn't even exist. The air in that room is always cold, always still. And in that room, P9 was the one at the front. My filing job was actually me briefing a 2-star admiral and 2 senior field agents from the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. I was pointing to a complex flowchart on a massive screen, a web of lies I had spent months untangling. "Sir," I said, my voice steady, "the contractors' shell corporations in the Caymans aren't just for tax avoidance. They're a pass-through." I clicked to the next slide. "We've traced the funds from here, back to sanctioned entities. The wire transfers are in direct violation of the Bank Secrecy Act." The room was silent. My heart was pounding, but not from fear, from focus. This was world. This was my hobby. When I finished, one of the men spoke. This was Admiral Cole, my commanding officer, a grizzled, no-nonsense flag officer, who had forgotten more about maritime law than my father would ever know. He didn't smile, he just nodded, his eyes fixed on my chart. "Good work, Lieutenant." His voice was gravel. "This is the linchpin we needed. Proceed with the asset seizure referral to FinCEN." He looked at me, and for a second, I saw something my father had never shown me: unqualified respect. "You just saved the Navy $100 million, Jensen. $100 million. And I went home to my small apartment and ate leftover takeout. The duality of it was dizzying. That night, my mother, Sarah, called me. She was crying, just as she had been for weeks. Her voice was this tiny, broken whisper. "Kate, please don't provoke him, just let it go. His lawyer says everything is in ironclad trusts. He says I'll get nothing. I'm going to have to accept the pittance he's offering. He's too smart, Kate. He's just too smart." "He's too smart?" The words hung in the air. All I could see was his smug face at the barbecue, him bragging at the restaurant. I saw the 20 years of money is tight right before he'd buy himself a new boat. I saw the college fund for my brother, and the student loans I was still paying off. And I felt this cold, hard clarity settle over me. It wasn't just about the divorce anymore, it was about all of it. I took a slow breath. "Mom, his lawyer is a strip mall hack, and Dad isn't smart, he's just arrogant. He's been arrogant his entire life, and he's about to find out what boat law really means." After I hung up with my mom, the anger I felt wasn't hot. It was cold. It was the focused, methodical calm of a problem that needed solving. As a JAG officer, I knew my boundaries. I couldn't represent my mother in court. That would be a massive, career-ending conflict of interest, and my father would use it to have the whole case thrown out. But he had made a fatal miscalculation. That night at the restaurant, he hadn't just insulted his daughter. He had openly confessed to multiple federal crimes, directly to a federal officer. I wasn't just a good daughter. I was a mandated reporter. His bragging wasn't just an insult. It was a confession. So I went to work. This wasn't some Hollywood hacking scene where I broke into his servers. I didn't have to. I didn't break a single law. I simply did my job. I used the exact same tools I use every day to hunt down fraudulent defense contractors, publicly available records, international shipping manifests, and state business filings. My father had dozens of development LLCs, all designed to look impressive and impossibly complex to a strip mall hack lawyer. He was arrogant. He was sloppy. He thought no one was smart enough to actually look. I spent the next 2 weeks, in my off hours, sitting at my small apartment desk, cross-referencing his shell companies with shipping registries. And then, I found it. My blood ran cold. One of his development LLCs, The very one he'd used to buy his last boat was a direct pass-through for a shell corporation linked to a sanctioned Russian oligarch. It was a name I recognized instantly, a name my team at Norfolk was already investigating for a completely unrelated Navy contract fraud case. He was using the same illegal channel for his personal toys and his professional fraud. His arrogance was his undoing. From that moment, the path was crystal clear. I built 2 packages. The first, Package A, was a formal, detailed, and completely anonymous tip. I sent it straight to the IRS Criminal Investigation Division and to FinCEN. I cited the specific statutes he had violated, including 18 U.S. Code Section 1956, and I listed the exact account numbers he'd been stupid enough to brag about. The second, Package B, was for the divorce court. It was a simple, clean revised schedule of assets, which I gave to my mother's terrified lawyer. It listed the exact offshore accounts my father had forgotten to declare. This was perfectly legal. It was just a daughter helping her mom get the facts straight. This schedule, this was the letter for the judge. My mother's lawyer was preparing for a divorce. I was preparing for an asset forfeiture. My father thought he was fighting his meek, terrified wife. He had no idea he was, really, going up against the U.S. Department of Justice. We were back in that sterile beige courtroom. My father, Robert, and his lawyer were practically preening, radiating a smug satisfaction that made my stomach turn. His lawyer, the one my dad had praised for being a shark, finished his closing statement with a flourish. "Your Honor," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, "Ms. Jensen's demands are ludicrous. My client's finances are, and have always been, an open book." He gestured to my mother. "She is simply entitled to nothing more." He sat down, and my father gave him a satisfied pat on the back, the same dismissive, paternal pat he used to give me when I'd tried to show him a good report card. The judge sighed, looking over at my mother's lawyer, who just stared at his legal pad, completely defeated. He had nothing left. The room was silent, heavy with the expectation of my mother's final humiliation. So, I stood up. The sound of my chair scraping the linoleum floor seemed to echo like a gunshot. "Your Honor, may I approach?" My father's voice was a low, furious hiss from the defendant's table. "Kate, sit down." He wasn't used to me speaking out of turn. He wasn't used to me speaking at all. He was still the king, and I was just the court jester. The judge looked at me over his glasses. He'd seen me sitting behind my mother for days, silent, in my uniform. "Lieutenant Jensen?" His voice was firm, not unkind, but a clear warning. "You are not counsel on this case." "I am not, Your Honor," I said, my voice perfectly level, my hands clasped behind my back. I'd given briefings to admirals. I wasn't going to be intimidated by a family court judge. I am here as an observer. However, my mother's counsel seems to have misplaced this. I held up the single manila envelope. "It's a corrected list of assets, filed with the clerk this morning. I am simply handing him his copy." This was pure procedure, and he couldn't deny it. I walked forward, gave one copy to my mom's stunned lawyer and, as required, handed the original to the bailiff, who walked it up to the judge. This was the moment. My father was still glaring at me, furious at my little interruption. He had no idea what was coming. The judge slipped the papers from the envelope. I watched his face. He scanned the first page. His eyebrows shot up so high they nearly disappeared into his hairline. That was page 1, the revised schedule of assets, listing 5 undeclared offshore accounts. Then he turned to page 2. His face went from surprised to impassive to something else. A kind of stunned professional respect. That was the carbon copy of the formal notification, stamped in big red ink, received IRS Criminal Investigation Division. The judge put the papers down. He looked at my father. He looked at me. He looked back at my father. And then, he did it. He let out that short, dry chuckle that cut through the silent room. He leaned into the microphone. "Mr. Jensen," he began, "your daughter, a lieutenant in the U.S. Navy JAG Corps, has provided a very thorough accounting of your assets. He tapped the paper. "Including several you seem to have forgotten, and," he paused for effect, "she's also included a copy of her formal referral to the IRS regarding, let's see, violations of the Bank Secrecy Act." My father's lawyer, the shark, went ghost white. He shot to his feet, papers scattering. "Your Honor, that's inadmissible. It's privileged. It's. The judge glared at him. The humor was gone, replaced by judicial ice. "Privileged?" he boomed. "It's a federal criminal complaint. Son, you're a divorce lawyer. You are out of your depth." He dismissed the man with a wave of his hand and turned his full, undivided attention to my father. "Mr. Jensen, your assets, all of them, are hereby frozen pending a full review by this court and apparently the Department of the Treasury." He looked back at me and his voice softened just a fraction. "You outsmarted him, Lieutenant." I didn't smile. I just watched. I watched my father's face. The smugness, the confidence, the arrogance, it all just collapsed. It drained away, leaving behind a hollow mask of confusion. He stared at me, his eyes wide with a betrayal he couldn't even process. And then, for the first time in my entire life, I saw it. Fear. He was afraid of me. He finally saw me. My father was silent. The booming, arrogant man who had dominated every room I'd ever been in was just deflated. He sat at the defendant's table, shell-shocked, his mouth slightly open, staring at the judge as if he'd just started speaking a foreign language. He looked small. His shark lawyer, the man he'd bragged about for weeks, wasn't even looking at him. The man was just shoving stacks of papers into his expensive briefcase, his face pale and clammy, refusing to make eye contact with anyone, least of all the client who had just tanked his own case in spectacular fashion. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the sharp, angry snap of the briefcase latches. I didn't look at my father again. I had no desire to. I turned and walked over to my mother, Sarah. She was still sitting in the gallery, her hands pressed to her mouth, staring at the judge, then at me, then back at the judge. Her mind was clearly struggling to process it. The decades of financial and emotional intimidation, the threats, the ironclad trusts. All of it, gone in an instant. I stood in front of her for a second, just breathing. Then I reached down, picked up my white officer's cover from the bench, and settled it back on my head. It felt correct. "It's over, Mom." She stood up, her legs wobbly, and took my arm. Her grip was tight. We walked out of the courtroom together, not looking back. The heavy doors swung shut behind us, and we stepped out into the bright, sun-drenched hallway. As we passed the main courthouse doors, I glanced through the glass. And just like I knew they would be, two men, both in nondescript dark suits that scream federal agent, were walking in. They had that same quiet, methodical energy I saw in my own IRS-CI colleagues every day. They walked right past the security desk, heading for the courtroom we'd just left. They were there for him. The doors closed, and we kept walking into the sunlight. 6 months passed. The silence from my father's side of the family was deafening. But my mom's life, which had been so gray and small, bloomed with color. I went to visit her at her new apartment. It was bright, airy, and filled with plants, overlooking a small, noisy park. It was the complete opposite of the dark, heavy, tomb-like house my father had insisted on, the one filled with furniture she hated. I found her in her new kitchen, actually laughing on the phone with my grandmother, arguing playfully over travel dates for a trip to Italy. When she hung up, she beamed at me. I realized I hadn't seen her laugh like that in 20 years. She looked 10 years younger, lighter. She was finally, truly free. My own life shifted too. The boat law job, my father's little hobby, continued. My successful prosecution of the fraudulent defense contractor, the case that had, ironically, led me to my father's own crimes, had gotten a lot of attention up the chain of command. The linchpin Admiral Cole mentioned had unraveled a massive multi-million-dollar network of corruption. My reward wasn't a condescending pat on the head. It was a promotion. My new office was bigger, with a window that actually looked out over the water, not a concrete wall. The plaque on the door didn't say, "Filing." It said, "Lieutenant Commander Kate Jensen, Department Head, Complex Litigation." I was now leading the very team I had once been the most junior member of. It was a strange feeling at first, being in charge. I was standing in a briefing room, one of those secure skiffs, my new natural habitat, in front of a group of brand new bright-eyed JAG lieutenants. They were looking at me with that potent mix of terror and respect I used to have for Admiral Cole. I clicked to my final slide, a simple summary of the case. "Look," I told them, my voice calm and steady. "You're all brilliant, or you wouldn't be here. But you're going to face a lot of personalities in this job. Big egos, loud voices. People who think they're the smartest in the room. People who've been getting away with things for so long they think they're invincible." I paused, letting the words sink in, looking at each of them. "Just remember this. Your first duty is to the Constitution. Your second is to the truth. Never ever assume the person shouting the loudest has the most power. Often they're just the one with the most to hide." I was back at my desk later that week, reviewing a complex seizure warrant when an email popped up in my personal inbox. It wasn't from an address I recognized. It was a new, anonymous-looking Gmail account, the kind people make when they're hiding. But the subject line just said, "Kate." My blood didn't run cold. My heart didn't pound. I just felt this immense, profound tiredness. The preview text was right there on the screen, a digital cry from a man I barely knew. It was from him. "They are taking everything. The house, the accounts, the boat. They're talking criminal charges. You ruined me, you..." I stared at the words. "You ruined me." I thought about that. Ruined. He meant his money. He meant his reputation. He meant the fake empire he'd built on lies and intimidation. I thought about the decades of him dismissing me, of him belittling my mother, of him making us both feel small so he could feel big. I thought about the college fund he never started for me, the family vacations I wasn't invited on, the constant grinding weight of being invisible, of being the cute hobby. I waited to feel something. I expected anger, or pity, or even a dark, satisfying flash of triumph. I felt nothing. It was just done. The ledger was finally, completely balanced. It was just noise. I didn't open the email. I had no desire to read the rest. I just moved my cursor, clicked archive, and watched it disappear. I took a sip of my coffee. It was still hot. And I went back to my work. My father spent his whole life building an empire on paper, convinced his name and his voice made him invincible. He just forgot that I was the one who was actually trained to read the fine print. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one holding all the cards. If you've ever had to use your hidden expertise to set the record straight, tell us about your checkmate moment in the comments below.